Europe is home to 5,000 photonic companies. Many of these companies will at some point require funding. How to find and wisely choose investors? What are the pitfalls in raising capital? It is my sincere pleasure to welcome Steve Frisken, who has had an incredible career in photonics. He has created a company, raised capital, sold a company. You've been through the entire process. Thank you so much for generously sharing your experience with us.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Carlos. It is a real pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you today. I appreciate the fact that a lot of you have come from a long way, and I'd like to sort of give you a little bit of the benefit of my experience, and I think Carlos's introduction was perfect. We can't preach to you, we can't teach you anything. You're all going to go and learn your own way to get through this startup and venture adventure. But just a few thoughts on, what if I'd known back then what I know now? How would I do it a little bit differently? So I want to talk to you about a few things I've been through, and give you some ideas of the different models, because I've actually had a few different models, both in terms of how the business operates and also in terms of how we go about some of the basic things like funding the business. So I want to talk to you about the bootstrap model, the VC come IPO type model, strategic investors, have a bit of a chat about family offices and how they can be valuable to you, and just a few words on being an angel. And then I just want to follow it up with a few thoughts about IP, because I think patenting and protection of your venture is a really critical thing to think about very early on in the process. And then for Carlos, I'm going to sneak in a pitch. Because if you don't take an opportunity when it presents to you, well, when should you? So just a little bit about me and my background. So I got my PhD in nuclear magnetic ordering, how nuclei interact at very low temperatures near absolute zero. I was up in a conference, I guess, in Helsinki, of all places, where I got invited to go and meet with all the experts in this field. And I thought about it and I thought, well, there's 30 people in this room who all love and adore this topic of nuclear magnetic ordering, but that's probably about the world's population of people that actually have any interest in what I'm doing in nuclear magnetic ordering. So I really wanted to change my direction, and I wanted to go and get involved in something that I thought could maybe contribute a little bit more, or at least be a little bit more intelligible and understandable to the people around me. So now I've had 30 years in the optics industry, but back then, really what I had to offer in terms of a career path seemed to me like absolute zero, seemed to be a good description for it. Now I describe myself, I guess, as fundamentally I feel like I'm an inventor. And to some extent an accidental entrepreneur. So Carlos, if you want to go and invite someone different, now's the opportunity to speak up, because you've got me. But entrepreneurship for me, probably like maybe a few other people in this room, is not something that came naturally. It's not something I studied. It's not something that ever really even hit my radar until I guess I woke up one day and sort of figured, well, that sort of is the type of person I am. So here's my roadmap. This is my product roadmap for my life, and I'm just going to use this as a little bit of a structure to talk to you about a few of the things that have been going on. So I started off in a company called OTC, which was my first career. I managed to talk my way in somehow into getting a job in a telecommunications company. And from there, I just want to talk a little bit about the process of how I got from there to the different companies and what's involved in sort of trying to set up those companies. So my first company, I guess, was OTC, which was a telecom company, and I had the enviable role of being in a research organisation that was very, very sort of advanced thinking and looking at the next generation of ideas. And importantly, I really had no deliverables for the role that I had, and I'm not sure why that was, but they were really just wanting me to give them an update on what they thought should be the next technologies that are going to be important for optical communications, be it Raman, EDFA, BREWAN, or whatever it was. So from that, with the help of a really good mentor that was very interested in trying to find ways to actually bring value out of that R&D group, that was the start off of planning a spin-off into industry. So I guess one of my first forays, and this is evidence, I guess, of the fact that I'm not born to be an entrepreneur, I dug up some of my old business plans. I managed to find them. They're now 23, 24 years old. And this is the product that really I was thinking about planning a business around. And it is actually the product, that we put together our first business that ended up being something called Photonic Technologies. So what's interesting about this product, I guess, is that it never eventuated. We built prototypes, we showed them to customers and everything like that. But the company did eventuate, and the company went on to be a really successful company with a successful exit. So having a product and a product idea and having a company, I think, are two very, very different things. And you've got to realise that there's a long path in between the two. Now, I just want to go back, and again, I found some more detail from that business plan. It was actually about 60 or 70 pages long. We managed to commission a sort of an external consultant to come and bring at least some sanity to the thought processes that we had about trying to get a business together. And, at the end of the day, we were launching and trying to sell this into a VC market, trying to raise funds for this idea that we had. And, as I say, this company somehow or other went on to be successful. Now, what was right about this business plan? Well, there was an awful lot that was wrong about it, but there were two things that I'd like to just show that were actually interesting and right about it. The first was that we were at the right place at the right time. Okay? That, typical hockey curve for a market and total addressable market and all those type of things. Well, this was the beginning of the telecommunications boom. And optical amplification was starting to become a really important part of all of the optical systems going forward. And the other thing that was really important is just one little by note in the sort of competition was that really there were competitors in this space. But as it says, that the competitor really had a product that was a long way from being a fully engineered product and really wasn't suitable for the marketplace. So there was a market opportunity there. Apart from that, I would say there's probably pretty little in that business plan that you'd really want to dwell too long on. So, what was the VC verdict? We took it out, and again, I refer back to the fact, accidental entrepreneur. How did we go? Well, we got nothing. So we were too immature, we had no track record, the market was unproven, we were showing hockey sticks. Take that to an investor, they've seen so many hockey sticks before, one more hockey stick's not going to impress them. But for us, the process was important. The actual process of building a pitch, of trying to understand the business, of trying to understand how could you make money out of that business, of trying to understand who would your customers be and how would you address those customers? How would you build a business in terms of building up the manufacturing capabilities? Trying to answer all those questions. That was the important thing about the pitch. That was the important thing that we got out of it. And I guess we got one other important thing, is that this was a spin out. So we were spinning out of a research organisation. I guess a lot of people spin out of universities and the like. To go through this process also builds the support of your research organisation. And what we got out of it in the end was what I'd call a soft exit. We had the ability to exit from where we were in the research organisation to get some research contracts, some consultancy and those type of things back in so that we could actually start growing up and learning those things we had to learn the hard way about business that probably, we could write them, we could learn them in a business plan, we could do an MBA, but until you actually feel them and experience them, they're pretty hard to learn. So this is me and the partner that spun off, and we did the typical garage, moved to upgrade that to a shopping centre unit. And I guess the question I asked myself was, were the VCs right? This company at the end had a return on investment of 10 to the 4, which is a good return on investment by anyone's measure. But I actually think the VCs were right. I don't think we would have been as successful if we actually, at that point in time, for this particular company, if we had the money and we decided to launch out. For one thing, we would have been investing all that money in the wrong product. We would have been investing in the product I showed you earlier, which wasn't the right product. And with a VC behind you, you basically have a little bit of a steamroll. You've got a momentum, you've got to actually build to that momentum. If your product is not spot on and not exactly the right product, it's hard to deal with VC money and the expectations that come with it. So I'm going to say that the VCs were right, but we did all right too. So as a company, you go through those stages, and this is just a little bit of a history of where we were. And we got our first real product that started generating real revenue for us was a circulator product. And it was really, from my perspective, I think one of the first successful telecommunications style circulators. Key takeouts during this phase of building the company is growing the team is incredibly important. If you make some wrong decisions, they can be really, really detrimental to growing the business. If you make the right decisions, they can add an awful lot of value to the business. And I've got to say, in my first venture, I did both. Bootstrapping in the growth phase, what's good about it is it keeps you really close to the market. All right. The other thing which a lot of in the audience won't relate to is the fax adrenaline hit. Now, what's that mean? Well, you're working and you're just waiting to hear that fax signal come in, usually in the middle of the morning, all right, when Europe wakes up or the US wakes up and it says someone's ordered something, all right? That's conditioned into my mind now. Whenever I hear a fax, it's like, it just gives me a little, it doesn't happen much now. You certainly don't get get it like you used to. So then what happened? The next stage, we'd been going for, I guess, 5 years. And then we got to the point where we were 23, 24 odd people. We'd built up the market. And so we were starting to look to what we could do with strategic investors. And we got a number of different offers at this point in time to take this to the next stage. And getting a strategic investor on board is a two-edged sword. It brings you a lot of value, and it can really focus and crystallize your growth plans, and it can make sure that you're addressing a real market need. It's also, you have to be careful because it is limiting on your exit options. So whenever you bring a strategic investor in, you've got to think about, well, what's this going to do to how I can exit in the future? And I think the answer is it pretty much makes it tricky later on. When we came to exiting, I guess we exited at one of the easiest times that history's had to exit, which was around about 2000. So we didn't get impacted by this too much, but at the end of the day, we ended up exiting to the same company that was our strategic investor early on. That became the easiest exit to effect. And, in this case, it was a very good exit. And so I think look at the balances for any strategic investor. If you're bringing a strategic investor on and you're bringing at the same time a VC investor or a non-strategic investor, you really got to look at the conflicts of interest there, because the strategic investor is not just in there for the cash position, they're looking at it for a different reason. So you've got to balance your other investors and what they want to get out of it. Now, they'll often like to see a strategic investor in there, so long as it's well managed. So if you bring in a strategic investor and the expectations on them are well managed, then that's a good situation to be in. Anyhow, it all got a little bit ugly in 2001, but in the middle of downturns and problems, that's when there's often opportunity. So we closed down our facility after building it up, and the next stage was really to say, all right, we've got a fantastic team here. We can pick the cream of that team to go and form a focus group who can now go and look at the next opportunity. However, the next opportunity was interesting because it was going to have to be now done at the worst of times. So 2002 and onwards, for the next 5 years, I guess, were sort of the real downtimes of the telecom industry. And that's when I started my second venture called Engana. So, in many respects, I think we were fortunate that we got out of the first business early enough, because it allowed us the opportunity to regroup and to put together a team. And when we put that team together, we really wanted to focus on something that had a longer term vision, because we knew there wasn't going to really be any business for the next 3 or 4 years. And this is a business that we put together. So while my first company, Photonic Technology, I guess was a classic technology push company, you take a technology out of a research group and then you try and find the market for it, create the market for it, and that can work. As a technologist and not an entrepreneur, I'd like to say that that type of thing can work. But this became more of a market pull type company. We really had a clean sheet and said, what's the market need at the moment, and then what can we do in terms of technology to try and address those needs. So I won't go into too much detail about what we did, but the product we finished up making was something called a wavelength selective switch, and it's used to route individual wavelengths through WDM markets, and it's now, this reconfigurable optical networks is now pretty much ubiquitous. So just a little bit of a flip where it went. We started it in 2001. We got VC funding of about 14.2 million in 2 rounds, in not real dollars, but Australian dollars. Our first product was a dud again. So 2 out of 2 I've struck out, in that the initial product that we were trying to bring to market was not the one that was successful. The successful product was later on. It was a wavelength selective switch using liquid crystalline silicon technology. So I won't go into too much detail about that, but the key thing I'd like to point out about it is this is a technology where a huge amount of money had been invested into it, and I'd say a huge amount of money had been lost on this technology. $250 million invested by major players in developing these backplanes, these silicon backplanes. Our play here was to leverage this investment, to say, all right, we're not going to do that type of investment. We're going to leverage it. We're going to take it and use it. And for a small startup company, on a moderate budget, that is a much more achievable goal than having to sort of invest and to create the whole investment from day one. So this is a different type of technology to perhaps sort of some of your big play technologies where you're looking to actually grow the whole process. So my partner in this business was a guy called Simon Poole, and he helped launch this venture back in 2001. And I've just borrowed a few slides of his because he's an entrepreneur. He likes doing that side of things. And so I think together we've formed a view of some of the takeaways that we can take out of this business that we created that ended up being a very successful business. And I think the key thing is that innovation is a lot more than just having a great idea. From our perspective, innovation is having a great idea and having a solid path to execute against that idea, to make it into something real. So what's the difference? So ideas are novel, but execution means it's got to be something repeatable, something where you can always get the same predictable outcome. Your ideas are protectable. They're also marketable, but for an execution phase, you really want to make sure that it's profitable. And the ideas sort of represent the creation of IP, and the execution is more, how do you implement that IP? How do you create a business and get something out of it? So, some words of wisdom from the past. But we need to find a way to sort of link ideas with execution, because the two don't fight against each other. And what often happens in big companies is ideas and execution can tend to fight against each other. You have the people who are the boffins in the labs create stuff, and then they've got to throw it over a wall and try and get it turned into a product. Now, Simon has this very nice concept and diagram representing the yin and the yang, and taking out of that the idea that the yin and the yang can be the ideas and the execution, and that within each of those, within the yin, lies a central core, which is the yang. So when you're thinking about ideas, when you're creating ideas, you should be thinking about the execution. But the flip side is that when you're executing, you should be thinking about how can I create the next idea. And that should give you if you like, a balance that creates a way for a company to operate on a longer term. You've got to have your focus on your first company. You've got to execute on your first product. You have to execute that first product and make sure that it gets to market. But at the same time, you've got to be thinking about what's next as well. And you've got to be designing it in such a way that you can take advantage of it. So, ideas and execution, they interplay, they merge together, they create a whole that's much bigger than either one of them. You've got the innovation cycle, which basically then allows you to create an ongoing sustaining business, not just get a first product to market. These are, as I said, slides stolen from Simon's presentation, so I won't spend any more time on them here. Just to mention that, you know, for every startup, we all know that there are failures. I had a go at a couple of startups. One startup was just a slightly wild venture technology idea, and another was an internal startup. Yeah, and those were ideas that had to be discarded along the way. I don't really consider them failure, but I won't talk to them in any detail, but I'm happy to take questions about them later on. At the same time, even within Engana, which later became Finisar, we had an internal startup called the Wave Shaper, which was a very successful product. Now I just want to move to the last bit, and this is where I should really be sitting on your side of the table, and because that's where I'm at the moment. I'm an old dog trying to learn new tricks in a different industry. I'm doing a company now in the medical space after being in the telecom space all my life. So, just talking a little bit about the different phases there. We were lucky that in the first two ventures, you know, even though we pivoted, we managed to succeed and survive that pivoting of the technology. In CYLITE, I wanted to go through an unconstrained technology investigation phase, a period of time where we just actually figured out what we wanted to do. And then the second phase was really to try and drive from a market perspective product definition and proof of concept, and then move that on to product development, systems development, execution. So in terms of funding, we self-funded ourselves for a long while, and then around about 3 years in, we had a Series A. And here we introduced the idea of bringing in a lot of family offices, so leveraging the network of people that we had contacts with, largely through previous businesses, who ran family offices in the US, and leveraging that to try and get some basically non-strategic money, which is non-VC money, into the company. Something I'd consider for all early stage ventures, if there's a way to try and access this money, it's well worth considering, because in many respects it's more patient money, and in many respects it's also can be a lot more understanding of the dynamics and the issues that you're going through, because a lot of the people involved often have run their own companies and come through many of the same issues. Recently we've done a Series B, and in that, because of the size of the round, we decided we had to focus it around a venture capital group, and so we had a venture capital and also family offices and founders floating around the edges of that as well. So we're putting that all together now, and I said I would do a little bit of a pitch. So, oops, I'll just go back one. So what I want to do, instead of doing a pitch, I'm going to spare you the pitch, and I just want to point out a few of the deficiencies of a slide which was from a technical slide pack but sort of snuck into one of my early pitch packs for CYLITE. And just want to acknowledge that it's really easy to fall into these traps. So this whole slide is great if you're in the industry and you know exactly what it's talking about, but if you're presenting this to someone outside of our particular industry, which is the optical coherence tomography industry, it really has no meaning to it. There's a lot of acronyms, there's a lot of assumed knowledge, and the graphics themselves, although they are animated and could actually provide a little more value, they don't actually provide any meaning to the people who are looking at it. So when you're talking to someone who's not in the space, doesn't really understand it, you really have to step back and say, well, yeah, how can I explain the opportunity? And also, how can I tell them how this actually means something and how it affects people personally? And that's the type of thing that's definitely missing from this slide here. I do, however, just want to show you just one of the beautiful 3D images that we can acquire at CYLITE, and I don't know whether it probably won't animate. Oh yes, it does. Right, so these are the types of 3D images that we're creating of the front of the eye, and using those to actually measure all the surfaces and to be able to look at cataracts and understand how, when you replace a cataract in a person's eye, you can choose exactly the correct intraocular lens to replace their existing natural lens, and ensure that when they walk out of that cataract surgery that that person doesn't need to wear glasses. So that's one of the things that's behind our current one. Now that's all interesting, but I think a slide like this is also very interesting in that one of the largest groups of people that actually suffer from diseases of the eye suffer from a disease called keratoconus. And in the way we can image the eye, it shows this up very clearly, and you can see the non-symmetrical nature of the eye as it's been sliced through, and that really causes distortion, as many people from optics would understand, to your eye. So I am going to hurry very much on here, just pointing out that IP, and particularly the one thing not to ignore in IP, is freedom to operate. And that landscape is becoming more and more complicated by the day. So really get your head around the freedom to operate side. It's great to say, hey, I've got a patent. Doesn't mean you can go and produce your patent. Doesn't mean your product has got freedom to operate. So that's really important aspect in anything to think about. I'll skip over the angel investing one. I'll take questions on that later on. And I'll just finish up with this. My partner Simon pointed out that he's just retiring from Finisar this week. So the company that we spent 16 years together in, and startups change you. And he found two photos. I had trouble telling which was the before and after, but I can just pick it now. So you think about the startup is going to change the world, but the startup will change you too. There's a lot of stress you've got to go through. Some of it shows eventually. So I'd actually just like to just conclude this section and pay tribute to Simon, who has just retired. He's a great entrepreneur. He's been a fantastic part of that yin-yang balance for all of the endeavours that I've been in. And I think find yourself a great partner to take with you through business. And I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you.
I sincerely hope that you have enjoyed the learnings and experience shared in this video. This video is part of the European-funded project Impulse and has received funding from the European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Programme. Impulse is the indium phosphide manufacturing pilot line for upscaled, low-barrier, self-sustained photonic integrated circuits ecosystem.